Sure. And yeah, the summary, I'm sorry. And I will go to the speech, but.
Abby, maybe turn your sound up. Yeah. Okay, hi, we are back here in the Ways and Means Committee. For anyone who just sits and watches us all day, thank you for your patience while we had a private training. So yesterday we had the budget address. We were all there listening carefully. And today we have the opportunity to dive into the details of the budget that more explicitly are within our purview. We are going to hear from Commissioner Grushin about sort of a broader picture first, and then hear from Commissioner Bolio about specific tax policy that is included in the budget. And then on Friday, we have a joint hearing with the Education Committee to hear from the Agency of Education about pieces of the budget with regards to the Ed Fund. So that is sort of our launching place for the budget for the year. Commissioner Grushin, would you like to join us? Thank you.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I only need one, really.
You can leave that one here if you want.
What? Adam Grushin, Commissioner of Finance and Management. Nice to see you. You folks may have heard that the governor delivered a budget yesterday. And I'd like to give you kind of a high level, but particularly focus on that construct that touches on this committee very much. So on the documents, there are two documents that will be put up there, but you guys don't get to see the cover. The cover is actually kind of pretty, and it's Millstone Park in Graniteville. But on page 14 is the revenue side of the budget. It's this is how we generate the revenue to do what we need to do. And in that, you'll see, taking it actually right from the top, you folks are very familiar with the emergency board. They come out with a forecast that uses the vast majority of our tax mechanisms to generate revenue that is arrived at through a consensus forecasting operation. And that's the 2.403. That was upgraded actually from the July forecast. So revenues are healthy. I don't think there's any other way to characterize it. The revenues are healthy, I think healthier than we have anticipated. Directly underneath that is some additional revenue from the property transfer tax. For those of you who were listening to the speech yesterday, that might seem like a little bit of a surprise, because one of the things the governor said is he's giving the Vermont Housing Conservation Board their full statutory allocation, which he is. But there are still a couple of areas of that statute that we notwithstand. One of which actually is related to the Commissioner Bolio. Under statutory guidelines, 1.5% of the property transfer tax that is taken in, which was about, I think, 80,600,000. 1.5% of that goes to the property valuation and review component of the tax department to administer the current use program, I believe. So every year when we drop a budget, we dial out Commissioner Bolio's group and we say, how much do you guys need? And they give us what their expenses are, which, since I've been doing this 8 years, have always been quite a bit below what the statute would give them. So what we do is we give them their requested budget, and we sweep the remainder into the general fund for use. In addition, you may remember, I'm going to say 5 years ago, maybe longer, there was a housing bond that came out, about $40 million. The servicing of that bond is done through the property transfer tax. And $1.5 million of that is taken from the statutory allocation that goes to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And 1 million of that is taken from the property transfer tax clean water surcharge. So 2.5 million in total is put into the general fund to make those debt payments, both of which will disappear when the debt is paid off. So that's that component. There's a small component here that is taken, swept from tax, and there's 2.5 million that's from for bond servicing. So that's the 3 million you see there. And then underneath that, you see all typically session law direct applications, none of which should be unfamiliar to you. The quantities are reasonable. I would say with one exception, liquor control is quite a bit lower than it historically has been. And you may also, I think we spoke earlier when I was here about the budget adjustment, there was a deficit in that fund. What we're trying to do is right size their sweep, their direct application to what their net revenues will be, which have gone up and down, but in the past few years, predominantly down. So we believe the 14 million, and this comes from them. So they believe the 14.8 million will be roughly equivalent to their net revenue. So there is our main base appropriations that you see, 2.509. Underneath that are a number of tax initiatives that we reduce from revenue. The commissioner will speak about all of those more articulately than I, but that's where it comes into our budget. So we're reducing our revenue a total of $15.5 million. And then below that, you see what will form a fair amount of our one-time revenues. Those are carried forward from the budget adjustment. Remember, we created a temporary reserve in the budget adjustment to carry those funds into fiscal 26, and also from fiscal 25 e-board upgrade that happened in January. So the combination of those two sums have $131 million on the bottom line. So when you take our base amount, subtract the tax initiatives, and add the one-time amount, you have a total bring to bear of $2.625 billion. And that is what the budget entails, the investments in that budget. On the following page, 15, you see, which I won't go into because these are, predominantly appropriations and in other committees of jurisdiction. But I did want you to see that we go through, and at your leisure, you may see how we invest those revenues. Are there any questions on kind of the sources and the construct of how we came across the budget?
I have a question about something that you haven't highlighted yet, which is the new TIF, which I'm calling DIF, but I think you have a different acronym for it. Where is that?
A new TIF.
There's like a new construct for TIF that's in some bill. That was mentioned in the budget address. It was not the Downtown Village Center tax credit.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think that's in our.
You're not reflecting it.
That's not in our budget. And the revenues would not be. TIFs typically would go through the ed fund.
Sure, yes, they would.
Yeah.
Yes.
So.
I don't like that.
I'm not arguing nor disagreeing, however.
You don't have that anywhere in your book.
It's not reflected in the big bill.
Okay, I will continue my journey into finding out what everyone's talking about. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yes, sorry, Representative Kimball.
Adam, could you back up a second? Because the downtown tax credits, you say the difference is 2 million, but that brings it up to a total of 5 million.
That's correct.
When you represent the total 5 million there, or is this just changes from the previous budget?
Yes, so that is reflected in the revenue forecast that you see at the very top line.
Okay.
When the emergency board does their forecast, they do it based on current law. Current law includes $3 million of tax credits. So that 2.403 billion is reduced by $3 million of tax.
Ready. Okay.
So this 2 million is reflected because it's new. It's not in current law.
Thank you.
There was another hand somewhere. But it's gone. Okay, great. Back to you, Adam.
So the remainder of my time is I wanted to make sure there is a language document. And I just, as I am wont to do, I whipped through this in my leisure clothes last night.
We don't need to know that.
Leisure clothing, I said, last night.
Thank you. Thank you.
To point out some things that I think will come across this committee. However, and the first one is, which I was guessing you may have been referring to earlier, is there's a new use for the pilot special fund. Pilot special fund, recall, is what takes in 30% of local option taxes. They go to the state, they go into this fund. And there is a proposal to create.
Can you tell me where in the language you are? Because you've shifted documents.
I am on page 4 of the language, and actually it's section B 1100, which is our one-time section. There is a new proposal to create a municipal buyout reimbursement program, which is laid out in section E 142.2 later in this document. And this would be a program that would actually be overseen by the Chief Secretary of Administration, Chief Recovery Office. And this is to help ease the burden on town municipal grand lists for buying out flooded properties. A number of towns have struggled with, well, the reality that there are properties that are flood prone. However, the additional reality is their grand list and their municipal services rely upon property taxes from this. So this is a proposal from the Recovery Office and the Secretary of Administration to create a mechanism that for 5 years would compensate towns for the reduction in their grant list, and then for an additional 5 years, half the reduction in their grant list. So it would kind of phase out over 10 years in total.
Right before I go to, just some like paperwork details. Are you booking this as a base expense, given that it's 10 years?
It would be an expense that would be booked to the pilot special fund. So it would have no general fund implications, but it would be.
It's all money.
Pilot special fund. And there is a $1 million approximation of the fiscal 26 need. That's what's in the budget. So again, it wouldn't be a general, it's not in the big bill, but it would be a special fund, $1 million estimate of the cost for the fiscal 26.
And I believe the governor just might have mentioned revenue replacement yesterday, which I felt very uncomfortable with, but buyouts feels much less uncomfortable. And so I'm just, I wonder if you could clarify the language that you would like to use on this, and then.
So for those of you who have the documents open, it's page 25 of this, or section E 142.2. There is all the language that will establish the program. And it starts out by saying it'll reimburse municipalities for lost municipal property taxes. And it's actually kind of a joint venture between the Commissioner of Public Safety, who will certify properties that are available for buyout. The Commissioner of Taxes, who will certify the payment amounts to the Secretary of Administration, and the Secretary of Administration, I think, who will release the funds. So it's kind of a cross-agency process, but all of the language for this is on in section 142.2. And I believe Doug Farnham, the Chief Recovery Officer, would be the member of the administration who would come in and speak to this more fluently than I.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to make sure I pointed it out to you that you knew it was in there.
Representative Wozniak?
Well, that being said, definitely want Doug
Yeah.
in, because I have, from Barry, so I'm very familiar with how all of this works. So is there administration, I heard you say that $1 million would just be for this coming fiscal year?
That's an estimate,
Okay.
but yes.
And is that based off of the total amount of properties who have already been awarded FEMA buyouts or are in the process of a FEMA buyouts or have been approved by VEM?
All good questions that I'm afraid I can't answer. I really don't know.
Okay.
Not familiar with how they came up with $1 million.
Okay.
We don't have Doug.
And my apologies for that.
Oh, no, that's
Probably should have known that before coming up.
I have lots and lots of questions.
The next,
Anna, before we move on, so
Yeah.
the use of the pilot fund, so there is talk of there being an excess on an annual basis of $3 million coming from the pilot revenues from the local option taxes paid to the state, over and above what the estimated tax payments would be to those municipalities that have municipal buildings or state buildings. And there's also, can you confirm that the supposed reserve, the total is about $10 million excess in the pilot fund?
I'm going to defer to my friend, the commissioner.
I don't know the exact.
Yeah, see,
So it's the administration's position that not to return that to the sending communities, but to use those funds in this way. Is that what I hear you? Yeah.
not sure I would use that terminology, but it's the administration's position that this fund can be used as a source of assistance to municipalities for specific needs.
But not to those sending communities, that to reduce the amount of the state share. Let's put it that way.
Can be used as a source of assistance to municipalities.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Understood.
Back to you, Adam.
The next part is section D100, one of my favorite parts. That's the property transfer tax. I just wanted to point out to you that is in there. It's a little different this year. Again, to emphasize what I said before, in the governor's speech, he said the VHCB will get their full statutory allocation, which they do. There is still some notwithstanding language in here, predominantly because the Agency of Commerce and Community Development did not want the statutory allocation to the municipal and regional planning commissions and the municipal regional, what's the other region?
Planning organization.
Yeah. Anyway, there are two. So 13% of this funds goes to the planning commissions, and it is divided 70% and 30% and 10%. Pardon me, 70, 30. The math doesn't work there. 100%.
Close. Adam, we will have more people in to discuss all the things that you're discussing with us.
But I wanted you to know that the agency has asked to reallocate that from the regional planning commissions and the municipal planning commissions. Would like to send more to the regional planning commissions and less to the municipal planning commissions. They both are going to get additional resources relative to the prior year. However, they thought the breakdown between those two should be altered, which is why you'll see there's some notwithstanding.
And will the League of Cities and Towns immediately come in and join us and say?
I suspect they will. They would be
Like
very
that.
happy to.
Okay, thank you. Representative Matthew.
Wait for the next round.
Okay, great, yeah.
But that is there. In addition, you also see the notwithstanding language actually at the very top that gets to what I was saying before. We send some money to the current use administration, but not the entire 1.5% of it. Moving on, I did want to point out to you that you'll see in there the Tax Computer System Modernization Fund gets an appropriation in section D101 on page 16 and 17. They get an appropriation both from the general fund and the ed fund to pay for the various services that VTax provides. But that is in the budget that may raise your interest. And then you heard in the speech yesterday, in section D103 of this, the governor spoke about a waterfall construct. That would be my terminology, not his. But there is a statutory language that directs any unanticipated surplus funds at the end of the year, 50% of which will go to the balance reserve. Another 50% will go to the pensions, 25% of which is state employees' pension, and 25% goes to actually not the teacher's pension fund, but into a fund that will, once the pension fund gets to 90% of a funding level, will allow for additional benefits to go to teachers. So that's the budgetary statutory construct. There is language in this that will instead direct surplus money to help in the education transformation proposal that the governor has come out with and will continue to come out with over the next 2 weeks, because we are aware that this will require resources.
And for a further explanation of all of that, both the waterfall and how the agency could possibly spend all of that money, given that they can't hire their existing positions right now. And though I want them to desperately, want to be clear about that, I want to give them all the resources to do their job well. Is that all? We should expect that testimony on Friday from the agency?
From the agency, I would also note they're getting a $4 million one-time allocation,
Oh, yes.
which I think the governor mentioned in his budget speech also.
And just to clarify, that will be base.
That would be one-time money, the waterfall money.
The waterfall's base, but the 4 million is.
That's one time,
So
That's
all,
cheap.
all of the money is one time.
thus far, yes. It's to provide them right out of the gate assets, and then to the extent that they need additional support, that will be taken up in future budgets.
Presumably consulting because it's one time.
It could be consulting, it could be limited service positions. And it's also, keep in mind, to help provide assistance to school boards. I mean, there's, so yes, a lot of it could be contracted, but some of it could be limited service positions.
We'll enjoy that on Friday.
Can't wait.
Are you gonna come?
I'll check my schedule.
Okay.
On page 25 is the language that I spoke to you about, or section E 142.2, the municipal buyout program, that I think the chief recovery officer will speak about. And then the only other thing I wanted to point out that snuck in here
Light suggestion, when you talk to, the chief recovery officer, a municipal buyout program it's just not quite what is actually being proposed. It's a semantics thing. So there might be a more accurate way to describe subchapter 4C. And you might just want to chat with Doug about that. Because when you say municipal buyouts, it means something very different to the municipalities who are going through buyout process.
Point taken. The only other thing I wanted to point to before yielding the chair is you'll notice in section E715, there is a request to repeal the sunset on the clean water surcharge. And that request comes from the Clean Water Board as well as the administration.
And just so folks know, the Natural Resources Committee is taking testimony on just progress to date on clean water, and then will advise us on sunset. But that's very much in the works.
I think I found most, if not all, of what is this committee's jurisdiction. If I find something else when I am reading through it tonight, I will let you know, but I think that's pretty comprehensive.
Thank you, and JFO will also give us an annotated.
Well.
I appreciate that, though. Thank you very much for joining us, Adam.
The real show.
And folks, we only have about 25 minutes here with Craig. There's a lot of content that likely will be revealed in these 25 minutes. And this is really just an opportunity for us to think about what more testimony we want to take and how on these issues, not for any of us to put any flags in the sand, as they say.
They're all brilliant ideas. We just passed them today.
Yes.
Well, thanks for having me, Craig Bolio, Tax Commissioner. Abby's going to share a slideshow.
I don't think we've met Abby yet.
Hello, I'm Abby Shepherd, I'm the Executive Policy Advisor for the Department of Taxes. Some of you will remember me, I was Legislative Counsel.
And we are very glad to have you here. Thanks for doing this.
So we are going to go through in more detail a number of the tax policy proposals that are in the governor's recommended budget. So I'm just going to start right on the second slide, Abby. So I'm going to go over a proposal for property tax stabilization, which you heard from the governor yesterday, and then also a package, a $13.5 million package for individual tax relief with four main proposals. And then also the downtown and village center tax credit increase. So for property tax stabilization, the governor is proposing to set aside $77 million from the general fund to stabilize property taxes in fiscal year 26. Under the budget construct, If education spending is held at or below the December 1 letter projected spending amounts, this would be enough to eliminate the projected fiscal year 26 property tax increase. And then as Commissioner Gresham mentioned, there's also language for a waterfall to have any surplus funds that might materialize in July to go into helping to support that transformation.
Julio, if education spending winds up above what was projected, maybe partially because of the way we're talking about this, do you expect the administration to request an adjustment to how much is being transferred?
I don't anticipate that.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's important, I think the governor's been very clear that this is the administration and the governor trying to do his part to help provide the property tax relief that's needed in the short term. But there's also a responsibility for school boards to sort of meet in the middle in that way and make sure that it doesn't just become a spending spree. Otherwise, this money won't be sufficient and there will be other challenges that we run into down the line, and it would interfere with the ability to do the more widespread transformation that we need to as well.
Thank you.
This is really to stabilize and provide some space for that conversation to happen. It's going to be a long, difficult, challenging conversation. I think last year, one of the things that we experienced is with so many budgets getting voted down, that made it really difficult to have sort of the longer term conversations because people were dealing with the acute challenge of making sure that they could get their budgets passed. So this is really intended to try to help smooth the runway for that discussion to be able to happen this year. That's the goal.
Can I ask, does
But
it
Representative Holcombs.
I'm just curious. The challenge of one-time money like this is it creates a cliff.
Sure.
It's going to hit people over the head next year as well. So
Yep.
this is just part of that disruptive cycle. And, we haven't really seen any data on what's driving costs other than what was presented last year. And I'm curious about the choice to put this into one-time buy down that hits people hard next year as opposed to tackling some of those other cost drivers. Because this doesn't actually make structural change. It just delays the inevitable. And would these resources be better applied to permanent solutions that create longer term stability and affordability?
Well, I certainly that's part of the conversation, right? We need to have that discussion about longer term reform, getting pressure release valves on cost drivers. The issue is just what could you do for fiscal year 26 as budgets are being created now? It's difficult to do that kind of transformational reform that would have effect in fiscal year 26 to provide those cost savings this year. So you're really left with three options, right? You could use one-time money, you could raise base taxes, which the governor isn't interested in, or you could try to force some kind of spending reduction in schools. Or if there's some kind of magic solution that addresses those cost drivers for fiscal year 26, you could do that too. But I don't know what those magical solutions are. So this is to try to create that runway so that we have time to be able to do the more robust transformation over the next several fiscal years. But you're totally right. There are challenges with uses of one-time money if you're not willing to do the transformational reform behind it so that you don't have those cliffs, right? And that's part of what the pressure from this year is there was $69 million of one-time money used last year, right? So it is a challenge on an ongoing basis. But what the governor's putting forward here is use of one-time money to stabilize this year. And let's have the discussion about that longer term.
Commissioner Berlio, I wouldn't characterize it as a willingness to engage in transformation. I think there's questions about the speed with which transformation can actually realistically happen, given the capacity across the board. And I hear
Yes.
what you're saying about the runway.
So that was the point I was trying to make. I apologize if that's not how it came across.
Representative Burkhart.
Yeah, I apologize. This is a new kid question. I just want to make sure that I'm clear. When you say that the 77 million would bring property taxes to zero, you're saying on average.
That's right.
So that if there's a community that had projected their tax increase to be higher than the 5.9%, they would still probably be seeing a tax increase, but it would be much lower.
That's right.
Than this one.
Yeah, that's a great point. So the 5.9% that gets cited in the December 1 letter, that's a statewide average.
Right.
Some communities are higher, some are lower. Yep.
It's not a new key question. It's actually a very good question.
Okay.
And we will dive so far into that transfer, folks.
So we'll jump next into the individual tax relief package, right? You guys have heard a lot from the governor about affordability. So the budget includes a $13.5 million tax relief package aimed at keeping more money in the pockets of working class Vermonters and retirees, builds on existing proven policies that are already on the books, that has really three main goals, I think: reduce poverty, enhance our workforce, and allow seniors to retire with independence and dignity. All in, and we'll go through these numbers, but all in, this package would provide tax relief to between 25,000 and 30,000 Vermonters, right? So it's focused on key constituencies and areas that we think could use some support, but it's also broad enough that it's impacting tens of thousands of Vermonters for relief. So the first thing I want to talk about is the, let's go one more. One more again. Cool. Yeah, child tax credit. Cool. So there is a federal child tax credit. This got a lot of attention in the pandemic because the feds expanded it, made it fully refundable. There was a lot of research about how it was a very effective anti-poverty program that has been scaled back at the federal level. I think in part that led Vermont and other states, but Vermont has been at the forefront of that, is creating its own state level child tax credit. So on the books today in Vermont, we have a $1,000 fully refundable credit, and fully refundable means that if the credit exceeds your tax liability, which can happen particularly with lower income folks, you actually get it as cash back. So fully refundable is a very valuable addition to a tax credit to make sure that it's impacting those who are at the lowest incomes. So it's a $1,000 per child fully refundable credit for income eligible families. The cap on it is that it's only for children up to age 5. And so what the governor is proposing here is to increase that a year so that it's eligible for children up to age 6. That would impact about 3,600 filers a year and provide about $4.5 million of tax relief. So that would bring our total estimated, expenditure for child tax credit to just under $30 million a year.
Thank you very much for putting this forward.
Sure. Excited about it.
Yes, very excited about this. Is this a permanent change that?
Yes.
Yes.
Everything you're going to be hearing today in this package is base.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Happy to keep moving. Cool. Next one is an expansion of the Vermont Earned Income Tax Credit. So this again is a credit that is piggybacking a federal credit. The federal Earned Income Tax Credit is really aimed at trying to give low and modest working class folks in the workforce a tax break. It is widely recognized by a lot of advocacy groups as one of the most successful anti-poverty programs in the country. Again, many states, I think 30 or more, Vermont included, have a version of earned income tax credit. Most of them, Vermont included, are essentially a percentage of the federal credit. So on the books today in Vermont, if you get a federal earned income tax credit, you can claim 38% of that on your Vermont tax return. Again, fully refundable, which is really impactful for the lowest income families. One of the things that is noted by the Earned Income Tax Credit program is it scales up very quickly with dependents. So it's a more modest credit for those without dependents. And so what the governor is proposing here to provide tax relief to the working class folks that don't have dependents is to actually increase the percentage of EITC for those without dependents to 100% of the federal credit. And that's really a recognition that because at the federal level, that program scales up quickly with dependents, that you could provide a more robust match at the state level for those without dependents without an extraordinary cost. That really does provide a more robust credit at the state level.
And folks, we will take more testimony on this. And there's a presentation from last year that lays this out because we took testimony on this particular proposal even last year. And the administration hadn't yet come forward with it. So it's, anyway, love this proposal too. The idea that 100% is still less than what folks in another category have is a little counterintuitive, and just want to make sure that folks have their eyes around the math of it because it is a little counterintuitive.
That is true.
It's a great expansion. Thank you.
And this is a trend that I'm seeing in a lot of states where they're starting to make the percentage for those without dependents higher to try to account for that discrepancy. We estimate that this provides about $3 million in tax relief to about 13,600 filers in Vermont. So that would put the total EITC tax expenditure at about $27.5 million. Both of these programs are among our largest tax expenditures in terms of refundable credits.
And do you expect that the cost for both the CTC and the EITC expansions would stay fairly stable?
That's a great question that I don't know off the top of my head, but we could explore that.
Spoiler alert, I'm going to ask it about the next one.
Gotcha. The next one is the expansion of the Vermont income tax exemption for Social Security. So a little bit of background on current federal law, and you see a chart on the screen. So everybody in the country gets at least a 15% break on a 15% exemption on reporting Social Security benefits for taxation at the federal level. You can see at the chart that there are some income thresholds by which it's larger than 15%, but everybody gets at least 15%. Because of the way Vermont ties into adjusted gross income, we use your federal income for the basis of your Vermont income. That means that everybody in Vermont gets at least a 15% break as well. But Vermont also has a more robust partial exemption that I'll get into a little bit on the next slide. But this is a debate in a lot of states. 41 and DC don't tax Social Security at all. And the 9 states that do tax Social Security benefits, including Vermont, most of them have more robust exemptions than Vermont does on the books today. And those rules are on the next slide that you can see that for single filers, you can get a full exemption. So you don't have to report any of your Social Security as taxable if you're under $50,000 of income. And if you're married filing joint, that goes up to $65,000 of income. And then that exemption phases out, over the next $10,000 of income.
And there's, this is sort of confusing, and there's a flow chart that JFO created, I think, last year. That's another way of trying to understand how the federal exemptions and the state exemptions work.
Yeah, the way I look at it is none of it really matters how none of the federal rules matter until you start getting above the Vermont income thresholds, right? And then the federal 15% kicks in. So the proposal here from the governor is to increase these thresholds by 5,000, both the full benefit allotment and where the phase out ends. They're not indexed to inflation at all. They're static numbers in law. They were last updated in 2022, I believe, when they were increased by 5,000. But, you know, inflation keeps going up, Social Security benefits and incomes go up. And as a result, some of that exemption is getting eaten away by those increases from inflation. So the goal here is to try to retain those by increasing those thresholds $5,000. That provides about $6.2 million of tax relief. I'm sorry. No, that's the current expenditure. I should have, yes. It's $2.1 million, excuse me, of new tax relief for about 8,300 filers. So that would make the full tax expenditure 10.3 million.
And I would like if we had inflators on almost all of these brackets always, so appreciate this. My memory of last time we looked at this is that grows fast. The expenditure for this grows faster than inflation, given our aging demographics. And so want to make sure that we're just looking in out years, that this isn't going to have unintended consequences.
Yeah, totally understandable. And I may be misspeaking here. I think 2 things are true. I think that it does increase over time because of demographics. I also think it maybe isn't as fast as we thought, but that's the piece that I'd love to see the real numbers. Cool.
Representative Wilkins?
I'm sorry.
When you do come back, I mean, I'd be curious to know, I'm just struck, I think the median household income in Vermont is now around 76.
I think that's right. Yeah.
So you've got partial exemptions for people up to the median household income. I just wondered about tax equity on people who aren't eligible for Social Security, but are earning less than people getting the exemption. That makes sense.
Sorry, could you ask that again?
This is the median, we're giving a partial, maybe I'm reading this chart wrong, but you're giving a partial exemption to people who are up to the median household income.
Okay.
And I just wonder, you were talking about unintended consequences. There are many working households who are not eligible for this exemption, but are earning less.
Oh, gotcha.
Than people who are on Social Security.
Yeah. No. Okay. I get your question. Yeah.
I'm wondering about the tax equity issues there.
Yeah.
Have you modeled those?
Well, I think my answer to that would be that's the point of the other proposals for earned income tax credit or child tax credit, right? Trying to get tax relief to the working families as well. And then understanding that this is a separate proposal would be more focused on retirees. Absolutely.
But there's still a gap because the other, I guess maybe I need to just look at them all as they layer, because it still seems like there's gap?
Oh, well, the child tax
Who benefits?
The child tax credit has a more robust income threshold than this. That has a full benefit up to 125,000 of income, and then it phases out at 175, I want to say. The earned income tax credit does have a lower income threshold, but it moves with family size. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but yes, it is lower than the 75,000 on earned income tax credit. That's true.
And I think it's a great suggestion that we look at how all of these line up with each other and if they're for specific populations rather than specific income levels, who we might be leaving out in the process inadvertently.
Okay. Let's see. I think the last one of the main package. Yeah. So issue that for those who have been around is something that's very close to the governor's heart. I think he's proposed it every year that he's been in office, except for two, which is to exempt military retirement pay and survivors benefits from state tax. There are 35 states that don't tax military pensions at all. There's one, I think California, that has no provisions for military retirement pay. But the partial exemption that exists in the books in Vermont from 2022 is pretty limited. It has the same income thresholds as the Social Security exemption, and you can't take both. So it provides really a challenge. I think the audience that's taking it is quite limited. And so it's not providing much relief right now. So the proposal is to fully exempt military retirement pay and survivor benefits from personal income taxes. This, from the governor's perspective, this is both a celebration of the military service for those folks, but also an acknowledgement. And I think that this is, that's not me. Okay. Cited in a JFO issue brief on this, that over 70% of military retirees retire between the ages of 35 and 50. And so they can enter the civilian workforce as well. And so it's also an effort to attract and retain those folks who could rejoin the civilian workforce.
And what's the average income level of the folks that are?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm trying to determine if we could get that. I don't know, but maybe.
That would be really helpful as we think about how all these tax credits stack up to create a tax system that's.
Let me think about that.
Great, thank you.
Yep. That is about 3.9 million of tax relief for 4,300 filers. And we've got the breakout of military retirees versus the surviving spouses. So on the next slide, it just has a chart with the numbers and the tax expenditures. So I do want to know, at the start of my testimony, I said between 25 and 30,000 Vermonters. What I'm trying to account for there is an acknowledgement that when you look at the impacted filers column, there's going to be duplicates there, right? There's going to be, there can be some overlap with Social Security and EITC, even there can be overlap with EITC and child tax credit. There can be overlap with Social Security and the military retirement pension. So I'm estimating that there may be about 5,000 duplicates in there, but I don't know for certain. But the max would be 30,000 filers with a $13.5 million package for tax relief. Yep. And then the very last slide I've got is something that Commissioner Gresham mentioned. And I would just mention very briefly, because it's something that I would defer to the Agency of Commerce and Community Development on, but the governor is proposing to increase the downtown and village center tax credit cap from 3 million to 5 million. My understanding is it's oversubscribed, seen as a successful program that can help stimulate private investment to rehab buildings and get more commercial buildings online and rental units. So.
And would that be Chris Coughlin?
I believe so.
I have a memory from, I think, the budget address yesterday about tax credits for new home purchases that go through VHFA, maybe? Does that sound familiar?
I would have to follow up on that.
Okay, cool. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Good.
And we are back here at 1:15.
Thank you.
To hear from the tax department again, but not you, Craig.